It was Thanksgiving, a day we always held sacred, a day meant for gratitude and togetherness. My wife, Eleanor, and I had spent the entire week preparing for it. Our house, a two-story colonial we had owned for 45 years, was a flurry of activity. The smell of roasting turkey, savory sage stuffing, and freshly baked pumpkin pie filled every corner. The fireplace crackled merrily, casting a warm glow across the polished oak floorboards. Eleanor, at 73, was a force of nature, her hands moving with a practiced grace as she arranged crystal glasses on the dining table. I, at 75, was responsible for the turkey and the carving, a duty I had performed with pride since our first Thanksgiving together. Our children, David and Sarah, along with their spouses and our grandchildren, were due to arrive at 6 in the evening. We had spared no expense and no effort. This was our offering, our way of showing them how much they meant to us, a tangible representation of our love. The first to arrive were David, his wife Carol, and their two children, 16-year-old Ethan and 14-year-old Lily. David, with his meticulously styled hair and expensive suit, looked less like a son coming home for a holiday and more like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. Carol, ever the image of corporate success, held her purse so tightly it seemed ready to burst. They did not hug us at the door. Instead, David gave me a quick, almost dismissive pat on the shoulder. "Smells good, Dad," he said, but his eyes were already scanning the room, taking in the furniture, the paintings on the wall, the very foundations of our life. It was a look I knew all too well, the look of a man appraising an asset. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom," Dad, Carol said, a tight smile on her face. It did not reach her eyes. She then turned her attention to her phone, already answering a text message. Our grandchildren, Ethan and Lily, walked in with their headphones on, completely oblivious to our presence, their eyes glued to their screens. Eleanor's face, which had been beaming with excitement moments before, fell a little. She had baked Lily's favorite cranberry muffins and had spent an hour trying to find the perfect video game for Ethan. Neither of them even acknowledged her. Soon after, Sarah and her husband, Mark, arrived. Sarah, our youngest, had always been the more emotionally driven of our children, but age had hardened her. She worked as a real estate agent and had developed a keen eye for value, both in properties and in people. She hugged us, but it was a perfunctory embrace, her body held stiffly away. "Looks like you have been busy," she said, her gaze also sweeping across the living room. "This house is a gem. The market for colonials in this neighborhood is absolutely insane right now." Mark, a quiet man who typically followed his wife's lead, just nodded awkwardly, a silent observer in what was rapidly becoming a business meeting disguised as a family gathering. Our other grandchildren, 15-year-old Chloe and 13-year-old Jacob, greeted us with slightly more warmth, but it was clear their minds were elsewhere, probably on the phones they too were already using. We all moved to the dining room. The table was a masterpiece of our love. The turkey was perfectly browned, the stuffing was moist and flavorful, the mashed potatoes were creamy, and the gravy was rich. The food was beautiful, a testament to decades of shared traditions. But the mood was anything but celebratory. David cleared his throat, his tone formal. "We should talk, you two," he said, not even waiting for us to finish serving ourselves. Eleanor's hand froze midair as she was about to pass the cranberry sauce. My heart sank. This was not the time or the place for a serious conversation. This was Thanksgiving. "David, please," Eleanor said softly, "can we just enjoy the meal? It is Thanksgiving." "This is important, Mom," Sarah interjected, her voice sharp. "We need to discuss the house. It is the most valuable thing you own. We have been talking, and we think it is best for you to put it into a trust. Or perhaps sell it now, while the market is hot." The words hit us like a physical blow. The festive spirit we had worked so hard to create evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, numbing shock. They were talking about our home, our sanctuary, as if it were a piece of inventory to be moved, a cold, unfeeling thing with a price tag. The very place where they had grown up, where we had nursed them through sickness and celebrated their successes, was now nothing but a financial commodity. "A trust?" A sale? I repeated, my voice hollow. What are you talking about? Dad, be realistic, David said, his tone condescending. You are not getting any younger. The upkeep on this place is significant. We worry about you. This is about being practical, about protecting your assets. Protecting your assets, Sarah added, a small, knowing smile on her lips. It was a thinly veiled lie, and we all knew it. They were not protecting our assets. They were staking their claim. They were looking at their potential inheritance, at the years of our lives distilled into a single, saleable object, and they could not wait to get their hands on it. The conversation that followed was a slow, agonizing torture. They did not ask about our health, our feelings, or our dog, Buster, who was lying patiently under the table, a constant, loving presence in the chaos. They spoke of the house as if we were not there, as if we were already ghosts. They debated what a fair split would be. David argued that he, as the eldest and a successful businessman, should get the larger share to invest. Sarah countered that she had spent more time with us over the years, a claim that was demonstrably false, and therefore deserved more. They were arguing over our inheritance, an inheritance that was not even an inheritance yet, right there at our Thanksgiving table. I think we should put it up for sale in the spring, David said, addressing his sister, not us. The garden looks better then, and the light is perfect for pictures. The yard work alone is becoming too much for them. Are you saying we cannot handle our own yard? Eleanor finally spoke up, her voice trembling with indignation. We enjoy the garden. It is our hobby. Mom, you are being emotional, Carol chimed in, finally looking up from her phone. This is a sound financial decision. You could live in a nice condo, a retirement community. You would not have to worry about anything. The suggestion of a retirement community, an institution where we would be warehoused and forgotten, felt like a deliberate insult. It was a sentence of irrelevance, a quiet dismissal of our life and our capabilities. The very idea that they would make this decision for us, without our consent, our input, or our even considering our feelings, was a level of disrespect we had never anticipated. The meal, which had started with such promise, turned to ash in my mouth. I could not eat. Eleanor could not eat. The children and grandchildren, however, ate heartily, oblivious to the emotional carnage they had created. Ethan and Lily were on their phones, occasionally looking up to complain about the food, which they deemed too old-fashioned. Chloe and Jacob were no better, muttering about how the Wi-Fi was slow and how they would rather be somewhere else. The final straw came when David pulled out a manila folder from his briefcase. Dad, I have an idea, he said, a predatory glint in his eye. I have drafted some documents for a family trust. It would make things so much easier for you and for us down the line. It would also save a lot on taxes. He pushed the folder across the table toward me. It was filled with legal jargon, papers that I knew instinctively were designed to strip us of our autonomy. This was not a suggestion. This was a demand. He wanted us to sign away our home, our future, our independence, on Thanksgiving, the day we had invited them into our home to show them our love. We will look at them later, David, I said, pushing the folder back. My voice was low, laced with a calm anger I did not know I possessed. Not tonight. Not ever, probably. This is our home. Our life. We are not selling it, and we are not giving it away to a family trust or anything else. The room went silent. The children and their spouses stared at us, a mixture of shock and annoyance on their faces. They had so confidently expected us to cave, to be the docile, aging parents who would do as they were told. Our refusal was an unexpected rebellion. Fine, David said, his jaw clenched. Have it your way. But do not come crying to us when the property taxes get to be too much, or when you cannot afford to fix a leaky roof. Or when you trip and fall down the stairs and no one is around to help, Sarah added, a cruel, passive-aggressive tone in her voice. That was it. The final, hurtful jab. They had not come to celebrate with us. They had come to feast on our inheritance, to pick at the bones of our lives while we were still living them. The love we had poured into that Thanksgiving dinner, into that house, into them, felt completely unreciprocated, utterly wasted. The rest of the evening was a blur of forced pleasantries and silent resentment. The children left soon after, their goodbyes as empty as their earlier conversations. They left their half-eaten food on the table, the dirty dishes in the sink, and a hollow ache in our hearts. Eleanor and I stood in the middle of our messy, silent living room, the cold Thanksgiving air seeping in from the open front door. The vibrant warmth of the crackling fire was gone, and so was the delicious smell of our meal. The place felt empty and hollowed out, much like we did. We looked at each other, the same devastating pain reflected in our eyes. Then, a soft whimper. From under the dining table, Buster, our little rescue mutt, crawled out. He had been so quiet and patient the entire time, a small, furry shadow of unconditional love. He came to me, nudged my leg with his nose, and then looked up at me with his big, brown eyes, his tail giving a gentle thump on the floor. He did not care about the house, about the trust, about our finances. He only cared about us. I reached down and scratched behind his ears. He licked my hand. It was in that moment, looking at this creature who had given us more love and respect in 2 hours than our own children had in years, that a new feeling began to stir within me. It was a feeling of resolve, of righteous indignation. They thought they could take everything from us, that they could treat us with such callous disregard. They were wrong. They were so wrong. I looked at Eleanor, and she looked at me. There was no need for words. We both knew what we were thinking. We were not going to be their victims. We were going to do something. Something they would never, ever see coming. The days following Thanksgiving were a quiet, somber blur. The house, once filled with the warmth and laughter of family gatherings, now felt like a mausoleum of lost dreams. The scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon had been replaced by the sterile smell of regret. Eleanor and I moved about our home like two strangers, each lost in our own thoughts of what had been said. The dishes remained in the sink for a day, the leftovers untouched. It was not a question of laziness, but of a profound exhaustion that had settled deep in our bones. It was the kind of weariness that comes from a betrayal of the heart, a pain far more crippling than any physical ailment. Buster, our steadfast companion, seemed to sense our distress. He was our little shadow, padding silently behind us, nudging our hands for attention, a constant, loving presence. He did not ask for anything. He simply existed, a quiet testament to unconditional affection. His existence, so uncomplicated and pure, was a stark contrast to the greed-fueled complexity of our children's motivations. It was a new year, and with it came a new resolve. We were not going to spend the rest of our days in sorrow and resentment. We had a home to protect, a life to live, and a dignity to reclaim. Our conversation began on a cold morning while sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where we had signed the mortgage papers all those years ago. "What are we going to do?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft but firm. There was no more trembling, only a quiet determination. "They want to take everything from us." "They will not get a thing," I stated, the words a promise to myself as much as to her. I had spent sleepless nights replaying David and Sarah's words, the condescending tones, the cold calculations. The memory of David's manila folder, pushed across the table like a deed of ownership, was a constant, burning image in my mind. We decided on a plan. The first step was to secure our financial future, to ensure that we could live comfortably and independently without any help or interference from our children. Our retirement savings were modest, but we were both fiscally responsible. We decided to liquidate some of our less profitable investments and consolidate our assets. It was not about punishing them yet, it was about protecting ourselves. We sought the counsel of our longtime financial advisor, a kind woman named Margaret who had known us for decades. "You two look wonderful," Margaret said, smiling warmly as we sat down in her office. "How was Thanksgiving?" I just looked at Eleanor, and she looked at me. The question, so simple and well-intentioned, brought a fresh wave of pain. I briefly recounted the events, glossing over the worst parts, but Margaret saw through the polite brevity. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of profound sadness and empathy. "I am so sorry to hear that," she said, her voice genuine. "It is a situation I see far too often. I am glad you are being proactive." With Margaret's help, we began to put our house in order. We set up an irrevocable trust for ourselves, ensuring that our assets were protected from any legal challenges or external pressures. We also began to plan a vacation, something we had postponed for years, always thinking of saving for our children's future, a future they now seemed to want to expedite for their own benefit. We were going to the Italian coast, a place we had dreamed of visiting for our 50th anniversary. This was our first act of defiance, our first step toward reclaiming our joy. The first volley from our children came a week later in the form of an unannounced visit from David and Carol. They arrived on a Saturday morning, their faces a mask of feigned concern. "We were worried about you," David said, stepping past us into the living room without an invitation. "You have not been answering your calls." This was a lie. They had called once, an hour after they left, to ask for a specific document relating to the house's deed. We had ignored the call. "We have been busy," Eleanor said, her tone cool and distant. "What do you want?" "Mom, that is not a fair way to speak to your son," Carol said, a saccharine tone in her voice. "We just want to check on you. And also, we wanted to see if you had signed the papers I gave you. The sooner we get that trust set up, the better." They were not even pretending anymore. Their concern was a thin facade, easily cracked by their overt greed. I looked at David, at the same predatory glint in his eyes that I had seen on Thanksgiving. "The papers are in the shredder, David," I said calmly. "We are not signing them. We have no intention of putting this house in a trust." The look of shock on their faces was priceless. David's jaw dropped, and Carol's tight smile vanished. "You did what?" David finally sputtered. "Dad, those were legal documents. They were for your protection." "No, David," I said, stepping closer to him. My voice was low, but it carried the weight of 75 years of disappointment. "They were for your protection. They were for you to get a hold of our lives and our home. This is our home. We are the ones who decide what happens to it. Not you. Not Sarah. No one." Their visit ended abruptly. They stormed out, David shouting about how ungrateful and stubborn we were, and Carol threatening to go to Sarah and tell her everything. Their anger was not a product of concern for us, but of their frustration that their plan was not working. They had expected us to be helpless, to be easily manipulated. Our newfound resolve was a threat to their carefully constructed scheme. After they left, the silence that settled over the house was different. It was not a sad, empty silence. It was a silence of victory, a quiet triumph. Eleanor and I sat together on the sofa, Buster curled up at our feet, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, we both felt a sense of peace. We were no longer victims. We were the masters of our own destiny. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of small, but significant, acts of rebellion. We went shopping and bought ourselves new clothes that were not practical or sensible, but simply beautiful. We had a contractor come in and remodel our kitchen, an expensive and unnecessary project we had put off for years for the kids. We dined at fancy restaurants, and we planned our trip to Italy with an intensity we had not felt in years. Our lives, which had seemed to be shrinking, were now expanding. Of course, our children did not take this well. They saw our spending as reckless, our joy as a personal affront. Sarah called, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Mom, I am hearing about a kitchen remodel and a trip to Italy. How can you afford that? We thought you were having financial issues. We were just talking about how to help you downsize." "We are not having financial issues, Sarah," Eleanor said, a hint of a smile in her voice. "We are having a lovely time. We have lived our lives for you and your brother. It is our turn to live for ourselves. We are not downsizing. We are living large." The conversation was short and ended with Sarah hanging up in a huff. The phone rang again an hour later. It was David. He was furious. "Dad, what is this I hear about a vacation and a new kitchen? That is our inheritance you are spending. We need to talk to you about your finances." "Our finances are not your concern, David," I said, a wave of cold anger washing over me. "And our money is not your inheritance. It is our money. We earned it. We are going to spend it. If we decide to spend every last cent on ourselves, it is our right to do so. You have no say in the matter." "You are being selfish," David spat, the line crackling with his rage. "You are being completely irresponsible." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Selfish? Irresponsible? You came to our house on Thanksgiving and argued over our dead bodies, David. You debated who should get what while we were sitting right there. You presented me with legal documents to sign away our home. Do not lecture me on selfishness or irresponsibility. You know nothing about it. I hung up the phone before he could respond. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from a powerful, liberating anger. I had finally said what I had been holding in for years. The dam had broken, and a flood of righteous indignation poured forth. That evening, Eleanor and I sat in our newly remodeled kitchen. The new countertops gleamed, and the fresh coat of paint on the cabinets seemed to hold a promise of a better future. Buster was sleeping soundly in his new, plush bed by the fireplace, a gift we had bought for him during our shopping spree. We watched him, his little body rising and falling with each peaceful breath. He was the one who had been there for us, the one who had never asked for anything but a kind word and a belly rub. We knew our children would not give up. We knew this was just the beginning of their attempts to control us. But we also knew we were not alone. We had each other, and we had Buster. And we had a new will drafted, a will that was going to surprise them in a way they would never, ever forget. We had a plan, and for the first time in a long time, we were looking forward to the future, a future that was, in many ways, just beginning. The new year arrived, not with the typical joy and celebration we had known for decades, but with a cold sense of foreboding. The phone calls from David and Sarah had become a relentless barrage of accusations and passive-aggressive remarks. They were no longer simply suggesting a course of action. They were now actively, and rather crudely, trying to control our lives. It was not enough that they wanted our house. They wanted to dictate how we lived in it and how we spent our money. Our small acts of rebellion, the kitchen remodel, the dinner at a fancy restaurant, the trip to Italy, had served to provoke them further. Their indignation was not for our financial well-being, but for the spending of what they considered to be their future inheritance. A week into January, a large, official-looking envelope arrived. It was from a law firm, a firm we did not recognize. Inside, we found a letter and a new set of legal documents. The letter, written in a cold, impersonal tone, was a thinly veiled threat. It stated that our children, David and Sarah, had expressed concern for our mental and financial capacity and that they had taken steps to ensure our assets were protected. The documents were an application for a conservatorship, a legal maneuver that would grant them full control over our finances and our home. It was a direct, vicious assault on our autonomy. Eleanor read the letter with a quiet, terrifying calm. Her hands, which had been so quick and graceful with the Thanksgiving dinner preparations, were now trembling slightly as she held the paper. "They want to have us declared incompetent," she said, her voice a whisper of disbelief. "They want to take everything away from us while we are still living." I felt a surge of rage so powerful it threatened to consume me. My own children, the two human beings for whom I would have given my life without a second thought, were attempting to invalidate us. This was not a disagreement over money or traditions. This was a war, and they had just fired the first, most unforgivable shot. We did not call them. We did not write them. We simply took the documents, placed them in a folder, and put them on the dining room table as a reminder of the battle we were now fighting. We then called Margaret, our financial advisor. Her reaction was one of pure, unadulterated outrage. "This is a disgrace," she said, her voice sharp with professional indignation. "You are more than competent. You are a 50-year-old couple in your 70s. You are perfectly capable of making your own decisions. We will fight this. You will not sign a single thing." She immediately referred us to a legal team, a group of highly specialized attorneys who dealt with elder law. We met with them the next day. The lawyer, a formidable woman named Mrs. Jennings, listened to our story with a grave expression. "This is not uncommon," she said, her tone sympathetic yet firm. "This happens far too often. It is a form of elder abuse. We will take care of this. They will not succeed." With Mrs. Jennings' help, we drafted a new legal strategy, a counteroffensive that would not only defend us, but also make a clear statement of our independence. We officially refused to sign their documents, and we filed a formal response stating that we were of sound mind and body. We also officially disinherited David and Sarah and began the process of drafting a new will. The old will, which had split everything between them, was torn to pieces and tossed into our fireplace. This was not an act of childish rage, but a deliberate, calculated step toward our final, painful freedom. The children, of course, did not know this. They assumed they had us cornered. Their phone calls became less frequent but more menacing. Then, in February, Sarah called with an idea she presented as a gracious offer. "Mom, Dad, Mark and I were talking," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We think you should come stay with us for a few weeks. You know, just to get a change of scenery. You are still so stressed from the holidays." Eleanor, sensing the trap, was not fooled. "That is very kind of you, dear," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "But we are preparing for our trip to Italy. We do not have time." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Italy? You are still going? After all we have told you?" Sarah finally sputtered, her true feelings breaking through the facade. "Mom, you are being completely reckless. You need to be here. We need to have a family meeting about your finances." "We are not reckless, Sarah," I interjected, picking up the extension. "We are living our lives. The family meeting you want is not a family meeting at all. It is a power grab. We will not be a part of it. We are not interested." That was the last civil conversation we had. The week before our trip, things escalated even further. David and Sarah called us on a conference call. They informed us that they had hired a company to change the locks on our doors and install a security system. "It is for your safety," David said, his voice cold and commanding. "You cannot be trusted to protect your home anymore. We have a legal right to do this. You have been deemed a liability." The audacity was staggering. They were attempting to lock us out of our own home, to take physical control of the very place we had lived in for 45 years. It was a direct, shameless power play. The conservatorship documents had been a soft-spoken threat. This was a loud, unashamed declaration of war. We did not wait for the locksmiths. We packed our bags, made arrangements for Buster to stay with our trusted pet sitter, who lived just down the street, and left for the airport. It was a day early, a sudden, impromptu departure. We left the house just as it was, with their manila folders on the table as a final, quiet message. As the plane lifted off the runway, I looked at Eleanor. There were tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief. The past few months had been a waking nightmare, a battle against the very people we were supposed to love and trust. But now we were free. Free from their cruel words, free from their avarice, free from the crushing weight of their expectations. We were on our way to Italy, to a place where our names were just names, where our worth was not measured by the square footage of our home or the size of our bank account. Our children did not know what we were doing. They believed we were being foolish, irresponsible, old people throwing away their future. They did not know about our meetings with Mrs. Jennings. They did not know about our new will, and they certainly did not know about the details of what was to come. They thought they had us. They believed they had won. But they were wrong. The battle had just begun. And they were about to discover that in a war of wills, an old dog is far more loyal and a far better recipient of love than a greedy child. Our return from Italy was a homecoming unlike any other. The house, which had felt so cold and hollow when we left, now felt like a fortress of our own making. The air was crisp, the winter chill a stark contrast to the Mediterranean sun we had left behind, but there was a warmth inside that had nothing to do with the thermostat. It was the warmth of peace, of dignity reclaimed, of a battle won. Buster, our little shadow of unconditional love, was waiting for us at the door with a wagging tail and a series of joyous barks. He was a beacon of pure happiness, and as he licked our hands, we knew we had made the right decision. Our children did not give up easily. The first few days back were filled with more threatening voicemails and texts, demanding to know where we had been and what we had done with their inheritance. They were under the delusion that we had squandered their future on a trip and a new kitchen. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The final confrontation came on a Saturday morning. David, Sarah, and their spouses arrived unannounced, their faces grim and determined. They were not here for a family reunion. They were here for an ambush. David held a briefcase, and Sarah clutched a folder of her own. "We need to talk," David said, his voice hard as steel. "We want to see the new will you had drafted. We believe you have been manipulated, and we are prepared to contest it in court." "There is nothing to contest," Eleanor said calmly, her hands folded in her lap. She was no longer the frail, heartbroken woman they had last seen. The trip to Italy had given her a quiet strength, a steely resolve that radiated from her. "What is that supposed to mean?" Sarah sneered, her eyes darting around the living room as if looking for clues of our supposed recklessness. "Where are the new documents? Where is your lawyer?" "Our lawyer is on a conference call with us right now," I said, holding up my phone. I had already made the arrangements. "We believe it is time you understood the gravity of your actions." I pressed the speakerphone button. "Mrs. Jennings, are you there?" "I am here, Mr. Miller," her voice, clear and professional, filled the room. "And I have the final, notarized, and legally binding will in front of me." David and Sarah exchanged a look of triumphant confidence. They believed they had us. They thought they could scare us into submission. They were fools. "We have been informed you have made some changes," David said, addressing the speakerphone. "We want to know what they are." "You have no right to disinherit us." "On the contrary, Mr. Miller and Mrs. Miller have every right," Mrs. Jennings replied, her tone a perfect blend of legal authority and polite disdain. "Their new will is quite specific. The entire estate, including the house, all financial assets, and all other belongings, is to be placed into an irrevocable trust. This trust is to be managed by an independent third party, a foundation specializing in animal welfare." The color drained from David's face. Sarah's mouth fell open. "An animal welfare foundation?" she sputtered. "What are you talking about?" I stepped forward, holding the final document we had sent to Mrs. Jennings. "This trust," I said, my voice low and firm, "is for the exclusive care and lifelong well-being of our beloved companion, Buster." The silence that followed was deafening. It was a silence filled with the crushing realization of their own monumental mistake. They had spent months fighting over our inheritance, a home, and a life savings they believed was theirs by right. They had subjected us to cruelty and disrespect, all for a prize that was now, legally and irrefutably, going to our dog. "This is a joke," Carol finally said, her voice a shrill, hysterical whisper. "It is not a joke," Eleanor said, a hint of steel in her voice. "It is the direct consequence of your actions. We wanted to leave our legacy to those who loved us, who respected us, and who stood by us. And in the end, there was only one person who fit that description." She gestured to Buster, who was now wagging his tail happily, completely unaware of the legal drama he had just caused. "You chose greed over family. So we chose loyalty." David, a man who had always prided himself on his intelligence and business acumen, stood there, his face a mask of bitter humiliation. He had lost, not to a savvy lawyer or a rival family member, but to a small, unassuming mutt. Sarah, always the more emotional of the two, began to cry, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage and frustration. The inheritance, the very thing they had schemed and fought over, was gone. And it was their own fault. They left our home that day, not as the angry, condescending children they had become, but as two pathetic, defeated figures. They left without the house, without the money, and without the love that they had so carelessly discarded. As they drove away, Eleanor and I stood by the window, Buster by our side. We had lost our children, in a way, but we had gained something far more valuable: our freedom, our dignity, and the understanding that true family is not defined by blood, but by love and loyalty. The rest of our days were a quiet, beautiful celebration of this new life. We spent our money not on our children, but on ourselves and our dog. Buster was showered with affection, treats, and trips to the park. The money we had once saved for our grandchildren's college funds was now used to ensure Buster had the best possible medical care and a life of comfort and happiness. Our home was no longer just a house. It was a sanctuary, a place where love was given freely and without condition. And our children? They occasionally tried to contact us, but their words always rang hollow, and their apologies felt like an afterthought. They had made their choice, and they had to live with the consequences. As for us, we had each other, and we had Buster. And we had the profound and undeniable knowledge that we had finally found true family.